conseguito un master in politica della comunicazione internazionale presso l'American University di Washington DC e altri diplomi di specializzazione che non sto ad elencare. Ha cominciato a lavorare presso il Dipartimento del Commercio degli Stati Uniti come specialista in politiche di telecomunicazione ed è entrata a far parte dell'ITU nel 1994. Dal 2008 al 2018 ha ricoperto il ruolo di capo del Dipartimento di Pianificazione Strategica e Membership dell'ITU, supervisionando le comunicazioni aziendali, gli affari esterni, la strategia aziendale. Sottolineo solo alcuni meriti che ha avuto nel momento in cui è stato a capo di tale Dipartimento. La creazione della Commissione per la banda larga ITU UNESCO per lo sviluppo sostenibile. Ha contribuito al successo del Global Symposium for Regulators dell'ITU e ha guidato la strategia di coinvolgimento dei giovani nell'ITU. È stata anche pioniera del contributo dell'ITU alla Equals Global Partnership for Gender Equality in the Digital Age e ha avviato la collaborazione con l'UNICEF sul progetto GIGA per connettere tutte le scuole del mondo a Internet. Mi sia permesso sottolineare il contributo che ha dato all'uguaglianza di genere all'interno dell'ITU, incoraggiando l'ingresso di un maggior numero di donne nel mondo del lavoro, oltre ad aiutare le donne e a contribuire a costituire delle alleanze all'uguaglianza di genere e l'inclusione socio-economica, e che possa aiutare a costruire economie circolari, ridurre l'impatto climatico e salvare vite umane. Questo per una breve presentazione, perché tutti sappiamo quello che ha fatto la signora Bogdan-Martin. The presence of Mrs. Bogdan-Martin among us is an extraordinary opportunity for us. So now some of our students have prepared some questions for you. So I introduce each of them. Chiedo magari ai singoli studenti che chiamo di venire qua, ecco là, ecco c'è il microfono e poi lo faccio sentire. First question, Morgana Figliucci, Civillo.
Secretary General, it is an honor to have you with us this morning. For those who may not be familiar with the ITU, can you tell us more about the agency's role within the broader United Nations system? Why the ITU matters for all of us, and what your priorities are as Secretary General?
Yes, thank you so much for the question, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by just saying what a pleasure it is for me to be here this morning. I look forward to the discussion, and before perhaps I answer your question, I just wanted to ask a question back to the room. Does anyone know when the first telegraphic message was sent, the year? Anybody want to guess? Okay, it was 1844. Anybody have any idea what was said? You two cannot answer. In the first telegraphic message, which was sent by Samuel Morse? No guessers? Okay. Okay, so the message was, "What hath God wrought?" Which means, what has God done? So put yourself back in 1844 and imagine the power of that first telegraphic message being sent. So it took 21 years after that to actually create the ITU, as you said, back in 1865. And so to come to your question, the ITU, over its 160-year existence, has been focused first on the telegraph. Then, of course, we moved to the telephone, the television, the radio, mobile phones, the internet, satellites, and of course, right now, the big focus is artificial intelligence. Our big focus is on access to connectivity. So our main objective is to ensure that everyone on the planet has access to connectivity. And today, 2.6 billion people, so a third of humanity, has never, ever connected to the internet. So that's our core focus. Our second focus is sustainable digital transformation. So to make sure everything we do in digital, whether it's digital health, digital education, digital agriculture, everything that we do is sustainable. And I've just come back from COP29, and maybe we can talk more about that. But also the ITU is quite unique in the UN system because we have, like others in the system, member states. We have 194 member states. We used to be 193. We have a new member state, which is Palau, and they joined the ITU a couple of weeks ago. But we also have private sector members. So in our discussions, when we debate recommendations, we have the private sector at the table, and we have more than 1,000 private sector companies that are part of the ITU. We also have academic institutions, and I just made a pitch to the rector. Join us. We have more than 150 academic institutions that participate in our work. And as we advance our two strategic objectives, we also keep in mind things like digital skilling, basic digital literacy, cybersecurity, and affordability, the cost of connectivity, and making sure that everything we do is also green and sustainable. Thank you.
Second question, Vittorio Ingrassia from the Faculty of Civil Law.
Thank you very much. As the UN's oldest specialized agency, how has the ITU's role evolved from coordinating telegraph networks in 1865 to addressing today's digital challenges? And the second question, what lessons can we learn from the ITU in how multi-stakeholder governance can help us navigate technological change and innovation over time in very different contexts?
Thank you for that. It's a great question. And again, going back to the telegraph, imagine telegraphic messages, and we didn't have agreements at the time to help a message pass from one country to the next country. And so from the very beginning, the importance of the ITU was to enable and facilitate global connectivity. And initially, as I said, it was to make sure that that telegraphic message could pass from one country to the other. And when we were created, we had a treaty with our founding members that governed the operation of the telegraph. When it comes to digital technologies, everything that happens that makes our mobile phone work, that makes the internet work, that makes us be able to communicate with satellites, is based on, let's say, treaty documents. And so a good example of ITU processes, and I think a very good example of multilateralism at its best, is the work that we do in terms of the ITU World Radio Communications Conference. It's a conference that takes place every 4 years. The last one was last year. It lasts for 4 whole weeks. Lots of night sessions and weekend sessions, and countries with their companies, with academic institutions, come together and debate what kinds of services should use what kinds of bands of spectrum, and how different things should operate when it comes to space-based communications. And the outcome of that conference is a treaty that all countries must abide to. So I think that's a good example of how we work and how we bring consensus. I think a second good example, which is not a binding treaty, is when it comes to technical standards. So if we're talking about standards for services, if we're talking about standards for equipment, right now we're talking about standards for artificial intelligence. We come together, again, in that multi-stakeholder process, and we elaborate standards. our standards get adopted, but they're not binding, so they're voluntary. We try to push the industry and governments to abide by those standards, and we just had a World Standards Conference in India a couple of weeks ago. And I think another example, which is also a good one, is the work that we do in the context of regulation. And so every year we gather the global regulatory community, all of the regulators of the world, and we come together to look at the latest regulatory developments. As you can imagine, with changes in technology, regulations need to evolve and to be adaptable to protect consumer interest and make sure that the public perspective is at the center. So we gather the global regulatory community together and we adopt best practice guidelines, which I think is also very helpful. Not binding, it's not a treaty, but it does help to help advance global regulatory dialogue and global regulatory frameworks. And I think when it comes to the UN context, we look to the ITU as multi-stakeholder, as I said, but as largely a consensus-based organization. So in everything we do, whether it's development standards or radio communications, we try to forge consensus in all areas.
Thank you. Third question. Giovanni Carlo Musto, Program of Peace Sciences.
Thank you. The United Nations Pact for the Future and Global Digital Compact represent ambitious visions for digital cooperation. How is the ITU contributing to these frameworks, particularly in ensuring that digital technologies serve the common good of all humanity?
Thank you for the question. And I would start by saying the ITU has followed very closely the Pact to the Future discussions, the development of the Global Digital Compact, as well as the Declaration on Future Generations. And I think it's fair to say during High Level Week in New York a couple of weeks ago, digital was the talk of the town. Everywhere you went in New York, digital was in focus, which is something quite different to what we saw in 2015 when the UN adopted the Agenda 2030 and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Back at that time, digital connectivity, access to the internet was not perceived as important. Of course, we at the ITU were pushing, but it was not felt that that was critical to future development. I think the Pact to the Future, and specifically the Global Digital Compact, demonstrates that the world is very, very different. And I would also add that, as you can imagine, the pandemic also, I don't want to say helped, but the pandemic definitely changed understandings and perceptions about the importance of connectivity, that it was not a nice to have, but it was absolutely fundamental. It was a must-have to livelihoods. And so in the context of the Global Digital Compact, that compact basically focuses on 5 key areas. So it focuses on the digital divide, the 2.6 billion that are not connected, which is core to the ITU's mandate. It focuses on an inclusive digital economy. So once you get people connected, how can they leverage the digital economy? It focuses on a free and open and secure internet, which is also fundamental. It focuses on data governance, another key area, privacy, which is a space where there are certainly growing concerns. And then the last aspect, which is also critically important, is the governance of artificial intelligence. And I think for us at the ITU, we're already working in those 5 areas, and we look forward to helping the UN system and working with our partners in the UN system to roll out the implementation of the Global Digital Compact. The UN Secretary General has set up 6 working groups to follow up on the outcome of the Summit of the Future. The ITU will be co-leading the group on digital technologies. So again, it's an opportunity for us to highlight the work that we do and to help double down on the implementation.
Thank you. Fourth question, Gian-Pierre Franco from CEO.
Thanks. Good morning, Secretary. The teachings of the Catholic Church place significant emphasis on human dignity, especially when it comes to serving poor and vulnerable populations such as refugees. How does the ITU's work on digital inclusion align with these principles, particularly in connected underserved communities? Thanks for the answer.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that question. Maybe just another kind of factoid I'll ask you. Anyone know what year the Vatican joined the ITU? I'm not allowed to answer. Anybody want to guess? Selena? 1929, and I think it was just a few months after the state was created. Right, and 2 years later, the Vatican radio started. And I just think that's interesting when we think about the perspective and how the state was created and very quickly becoming part of the ITU family that we're so obviously grateful for. So coming to your question, it takes me back to 2017 where we hosted our World Telecommunications Development Conference, and we were honored to have a message from Pope Francis at the time. And when he addressed us, he spoke about human dignity and the importance of promoting human dignity, particularly for the poorest and the most marginalized. And so the work of the ITU doesn't just sit in Geneva, where our headquarters is based, and we have technical discussions and debate things. It actually extends into the field. And when we think about the marginalized and the most vulnerable, we have a number of programs to help those that need it most. So for example, we work with UNICEF on school connectivity. We have an ambitious goal, which is to connect every school on the planet to the internet. Today, half of the world's schools don't have access to the internet. And actually, surprisingly, we don't even know how many schools there are in the world or where they are. And in the context of this program with UNICEF, we're also using tools like artificial intelligence to be able to track and find those schools, understand if they're connected, and target our interventions to bring connectivity. The second example I wanted to share, we were speaking about migrants before, is in the space of refugees. We're also very focused on refugee connectivity. So we work closely with UNHCR to bring connectivity to refugee camps. We work closely with their Global Refugee Forum. We work closely with the private sector to try to bring connectivity to refugee camps. I was recently in Ethiopia and visited a camp with my colleagues. And one of the top things that the people we met with at that camp wanted, they wanted a number of things, but at the top of that list was really connectivity. And they told stories about what they had to do to actually get a signal, including climbing a mountain that took several hours, and then other challenges when it came to recharging their devices. So to answer your question, very much, a lot of our work is focused on the hardest to connect, the most vulnerable and marginalized groups. We also look to having an inclusive approach when we provide technical assistance, and we look to also having an inclusive workforce at the ITU, and we have a number of specific programs on youth, as well as a number of programs on women and girls.
Gabriele Tamantini, Pisa.
17. And so this is 17. And so this is pre-generative AI. And we started back in 2017. We decided to focus on good. That's why it's called AI for Good. So we wanted to focus on how you can use AI for good. And we intentionally picked the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We brought together the UN system, our sister agencies, and we tried to see who's using AI, how can we leverage AI to achieve our respective missions. So we looked at agriculture, we looked at healthcare, we looked at education, we looked at climate monitoring, we looked at every single one of the SDGs, and we started to showcase annually examples, use cases of how artificial intelligence was being used to help accelerate and achieve the SDGs. We have launched something that's called the AI for Good Innovation Factory. We have a number of AI challenges as well, because we're really looking to put innovators with those that are seeking ways to solve their problems. So it could be a kind of grassroots effort, it could be something more sophisticated, but I think it's fair to say that some of the things we're seeing are tremendous and hold incredible potential, not just for local communities, but I think for the world at large. We had, I think a good example is an effort in Senegal, which is focused on agriculture, and it's called Tolbi. And we've had the opportunity to meet with the Tolbi team a couple of times. And what they have done is they've used data analytics, and they've leveraged AI, and they've actually been able to help farmers increase their yields by 200%, which is phenomenal. We've also looked at another app, which is called Fin App, and it's actually associated with an Italian university here, and that combines machine learning with particle physics and cosmic rays, and again, that's about helping farmers, and it has to do with conserving water and trying to tackle scarcity of water. There's many applications. We met in Uganda a couple of months ago, a young, still in university student whose mother had passed away from breast cancer, despite having had regular mammograms, and he has come up with something using AI to analyze mammograms, and the percentage in terms of greater precision was quite phenomenal, and this came from a university student in a developing country. So I think there's great potential. We understand very well the risks, the importance of the data, making sure that the data is not kind of repeating issues, bias that we see in our world today. So we understand the need to mitigate the risks, and we understand the benefits of innovating and trying to leverage artificial intelligence for good.
This question, Cosmas Vollbrecher, Peace Sciences.
Thank you. So, given that the telecommunications infrastructure underpins AI deployment, how is the ITU helping shape global standards to ensure AI development respects human dignity and promotes the common good? How is the ITU ensuring that developing nations have an equal voice in setting standards for emerging technologies like AI, rather than having frameworks imposed upon them? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, from our perspective, we feel that if you're not part of the digital world, you're not going to be part of the AI world. And so I think it's really important that we double down on our efforts to close the digital divide. And we have to make sure that the 2.6 billion people that are not connected are not left further behind. And also the people that are connected we often say they're not necessarily well connected or meaningfully connected, so we also have to keep that group in mind. One of the things that the UN Secretary General shared with us, he came to the ITU a couple of months ago and had an engagement with our governing body and spoke about artificial intelligence. And for him, he said, we have to make sure that AI does not stand for advancing inequality. So again, we have to make sure that we close that divide. I think that's the most critical point. We also have to make sure that sort of the computing power gets out there, which is currently not the case. We have the connectivity, the compute piece. We have to do more in that space, and we have a number of ongoing discussions with the private sector in that regard. And we also have to make sure that we help develop capacity. We have to make sure that we're including policymakers, regulators, the public at large, to help build that capacity needed to be able to participate in and benefit from the world of AI. On the standards front, and the standards piece is really important, and we saw that in the context of the Global Digital Compact discussions, as well as the Secretary General's high-level advisory body on artificial intelligence, the need for global standards, the need for norms. And one of the big pieces has to do with deepfakes, multimedia authentication, and so we have a group that the ITU is co-leading. We're working closely with other standards development organizations, so ISO, IEC, and we're trying to develop global standards to help detect deepfakes, understand when multimedia is not authentic, etc. I think that's a critical piece of our work. In the context of AI for Good, we've also developed something that we call Governance Day. We did it a couple of months ago. We'll be doing it again next year in July when we hold our summit. We believe it's important to make sure that all voices come to the table. We want to have our developing country members present with developed countries. A couple of months ago, we had the G7 effort, the ASEAN effort, the G20 effort, the European Union effort, the American effort, and we wanted to make sure all of those efforts were at the table and we had our developing countries present so that we could talk about who's doing what, why, and what should developing countries be able to be focusing on so that they can be part of this discussion and ultimately leapfrog quickly.
Question, Udo Fidelis.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Secretary General. In Fratelli Tutti, all brothers, Pope Francis, His Holiness, warns that technology alone cannot unite humanity and rather creates or deepen ancestral fears and societal tensions. And throughout the history of the ITU has maintained technical rapport, technical cooperation, even among nations in conflicts. So we are curious, already you've mentioned some concrete examples, to give us more examples on how the ITU has managed to transcend geopolitical tensions and serve as model for peace and the preservation of peace.
Thank you very much. The preservation of peace is actually enshrined in the preamble of the ITU Constitution. And the objective is to facilitate peaceful relations and international cooperation among people, and economic and social development by means of efficient telecommunication service. And so I think that reference really puts peaceful uses and peace and preservation of peace at the core of our efforts. As I said before, we like to work by consensus. I think that's our motto. There are often, let's say, competing geopolitical interests. There are also often competing private sector interests. I think what's helpful for the ITU is that we do have global agreement on the importance of connectivity. And so the fact that all countries and all players agree that connectivity is important, we can then leverage that in all of our work to try to build consensus and ensure that connectivity is used for peaceful purposes. I would say linked to that, and this picks up a bit on our work on cybersecurity, as you can imagine, there are actors that use information communications infrastructure for purposes that are not peaceful, let's say it like that. Every year, cyber attacks increase by 80%. We at the ITU help countries put in place their national cybersecurity strategies. We help them set up computer incident response teams. We help them do cyber drills. And so we work with our membership to try to help them be best prepared. But at the same time, the sophistication of cyber attacks is such that we still have a big issue, and we need to find ways to tackle cyber attacks and to tackle cyber crime. I think the other thing that we also see is when it comes to conflict situations, and today, according to our friends at the Human Rights Council at OHCHR, there are some 59 conflicts in the world today. What we see happening sometimes in those conflicts is that the internet is often shut down, but in other cases the infrastructure is attacked, let's say, and destroyed. And so this comes back to your point about peaceful uses. I think the ITU Constitution and Convention makes it very clear that ICT infrastructure is for the people, for civilians, and we need to be protecting that and making sure that that's not something that is attacked. What we have also seen is that when the infrastructure is a focus and there is no form of connectivity, that impacts also humanitarian support. And it's difficult for our humanitarian colleagues in the UN system to be able to do their job. And of course, civilians as a whole are all impacted when the connectivity goes down.
The last question, Nicolò degli Angeli, Peace Sciences.
In Laudato Si, Pope Francis confirmed a thorough ecology that links care for the planet with care for the poor. As COP29 in Baku approaches its end in the coming days, can you tell us more about how the ITU's work on greening digital technologies, such as AI, contribute to addressing both the climate crisis and digital inequality? Thank you.
Thank you. So I just came back from COP29 on Sunday, and what was interesting and what excites us, I would say, about this particular COP is that we succeeded in convening the first ever digitization day at a COP. There are many focus areas at these conferences, and 29 years into COPs, we now have a focus on digitization, and that will continue next year when Brazil takes over the presidency. So why is that important? It's important because digital technologies emit greenhouse gas emissions, up to 4%. Scientific evidence tells us that our sector has to reduce emissions by 45% by 2030. And it's not going to happen unless we do something and we start to hold actors accountable and start to track emissions. And so on Saturday, during this Digitization Day, we launched our Green Digital Action Declaration. We had more than 1,000 signatories sign on to that declaration, and that declaration calls for leveraging digital tools and digital technologies. It calls for building resilience into digital infrastructure. It calls for paying attention in digitization efforts in terms of making sure that they're green. It calls for sustainable innovation, sustainable consumer practices, and it also calls for data and data analytics. And I think all of those components help us kind of have a roadmap for where we need to go in terms of COP30 and beyond, and make sure that our sector is indeed responsible. When it comes to artificial intelligence, every 100 days, AI's computing power doubles. And in terms of energy consumption, I think the statistics are by 2030, energy consumption can increase by 160% when we look to AI. And so we have to pay attention, and we have to start looking at green solutions, at renewable solutions, at clean energy solutions. And what's exciting is that the industry is on board. We have just launched our Greening Digital Companies report, so we have some 200 companies that have started reporting. And if we can continue to track them, the estimates show that we can bring down greenhouse gas emissions by some 10% by 2030. So I think there's a lot to do. We all need to be responsible. And so the ITU, while it may not seem this is at our core, if we're representing the digital industry and we're emitters, we have to be responsible to make sure we're doing our share.
Thank you, Mrs. Border-Martin. We have finished our 8 questions prepared for you, but I don't know if you have some time more, 2 minutes for us. So we can add a couple of other questions. I suggest one from a student, one from a professor, nobody from students. So I ask first the student, Lene Sabate Yos Emmanuel, from the Pastoral Institute.
Thanks for the floor. In a few weeks, we'll begin the celebration of the Jubilee of Christianism. So, beyond the spiritual side, the church is a historical presence which boasts numerous heritages of humanity. Does the ITU plan to deploy its knowledges to unite generations and people around these humanitarian pleasures?
Thank you for the question. And as the celebrations of the Jubilee kick off, at the same time, the ITU will also kick off our own celebrations as we will turn 160 next year. And so we do that. It's an opportunity to kind of join forces. We think that we need to be focused on ensuring that we bring digital opportunities to all of the world's people, and we need to make sure that we leverage technology. I learned that Microsoft has been working with the Vatican to digitally recreate St. Peter's Basilica using AI. I think that's a very interesting and great undertaking that links to our virtual worlds work. We have a number of activities when it comes to the metaverse. We held our first ever UN Virtual Worlds Day. And I think in that context, it could also be quite interesting to look at the virtual worlds and our focus group on metaverse. So definitely, I think we have 2 important celebrations approaching, and we need to see how we can sync up and support each other using technology in those celebrations. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the last question from Professor Giorgiani. professor from the Faculty of Civil Law.
Thank you very much. Secretary General, this is a fantastic opportunity for our students and for us teaching to these young leaders how to best tap into these challenges of the present, not the future. So I wonder whether we will be here in 1 year time. What would you like to see in 1 year time happening from your point of view, from the decision making of the government and the decision making of the big players in order to fill in the gap of this digital divide, energy divide? You are in the intersection of an incredible scenario, which was not, of course, foreseeable before with the advent of generative artificial intelligence. Now it's the turn of the digital world to say something for the challenges of the earth. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. That's a great question. So if I were to come back in 1 year, which I would love to, by the way, I think we know, we understand the challenges that we face today when it comes to digital. We know that we have to do more when it comes to connectivity and this 2.6 billion gap. We have set up a platform that's called Partner to Connect, where we're trying to work with all stakeholders to make pledges, make commitments, and really help us to connect the hardest to connect. So that's one piece that I'd like to see continue to advance. We've targeted 100 billion to mobilize in commitments by the end of 2026. We're right now at 52 billion. So I hope in a year we're close to 90 billion. I think that would be important. I also hope that we can do more to make cyberspace safer, and in particular make it safer for children. Today is World Children's Day. We need to make sure that young people are protected. Children between the age of 8 and 18, between 70 and 80% experience at least one cyber-related risk, abuse, harm every year, and that is shocking, and that's something that we have to tackle. I think when it comes to artificial intelligence, we want to make sure that we're advancing a framework that helps us really mitigate that risk, so that it's not AI for bad, but it really is AI for good, because those opportunities can be tremendous in helping countries, communities further develop using digital technologies. And I think when it comes to climate, we can do more. And I'm very encouraged by what I saw with this commitment at COP29, that we can make a difference. Something I didn't mention, but we have kind of clear actions that we see that can be taken, is the area of e-waste. And so we have about half of the world's countries have e-waste policies, but if we look to the circular economy, it represents only 7%. So we got a big issue when it comes to e-waste, and it's anticipated that there would be 82 million tons of e-waste by 2030 if we don't do anything. So a lot to be done there, helping countries put in place policies, but then helping them actually action and implement their policies, because if they don't do anything, it actually has an effect. Electronic waste has an effect on the environment, but it also has an effect on people's health. And so we really do have to tackle that. And then the other piece linked to sustainability and climate, and this also is linked to artificial intelligence, is early warning systems. So the ITU is part of the Secretary General's Early Warning for All initiative. It's a partnership between the ITU, WMO, which is the World Meteorological Organization, the IFRC, and the UN Disaster Risk Reduction group. And so we've come together to help the Secretary General achieve his target that every single country in the world would have an early warning system by 2027. About half of the countries in the world have a system. But we can do this, and so I hope by next year we're close to 80% of countries having it. And putting in place a system, first you have to have a policy, right? Then you have to have your internal coordination. Then you actually have to have the technological solution, which is not expensive. We advocate for cell broadcast, but then you actually have to make sure it works. In developed recently and in developing countries, we've seen examples where countries have systems, but the system didn't work because whoever was supposed to send the message didn't send the message, or something didn't work in the process. And in some cases, it could be hundreds of lives, and in other cases, it could be tens of thousands of lives. And so for me, when I look to early warning systems, I often think that could and should be a quick win, because technologically, we don't need anything else. We just need the right coordination, we need the commitment, and we need to make sure all actors understand their role so that should something happen, we're ready. And I think the good news also when it comes to early warning and artificial intelligence is a number of private sector players that we work with are able to with great precision, predict like floods, for example. Not just a day before, but 7 days before, or 10 days before. So the sophistication using AI for climate monitoring is quite incredible. And again, it can help us to save lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's time for you to have your other appointments that you have. A very special thanks to Mrs. Bolda Martin for the time she has dedicated to us and for introducing, maybe some knows already, but maybe or some other colleagues, for introducing us into the very fascinating world of communication, which already plays a central role, but in the future will play always more and more central role in our societies, especially for the young generations, to the interest of our students, for your presence, for your contribution, and for the explanation of it. So I thank the students for their presence, vi ringrazio per la vostra presenza. Now Mrs. Bolda Martin and the other guests will move to another place to say goodbye to the Secretary General. Grazie a tutti.